The crew mingled with the humans and explored the town till evening came. It was fairly clear when the festivities were beginning, as it was marked with music. It wasn't just the flow of the crowds that drew everyone into the center of town, but the clear melodies that floated through the entire settlement. Flutes, drums, and strings came together in harmony. What was a familiar form of celebration to the humans was a bewildering exclamation of energy to the crew of the nebula. As they drew close to the source of the raucous sounds, they found an even more bewildering sight.
Are they fighting?
Some whispered.
Surely not. They're being chased by something, maybe.
A predator? One of those wolves?
But as they watched, they saw no predators, and it became clear they weren't attacking each other either. It was just movement, great and energetic. They watched as more and more humans joined in, hopping, running, twirling. Every movement seemed to the Nebula crew to be exaggerated like a terrible exclamation of joy in physical form. Indeed, many were hooting and cheering as they threw themselves around. Eventually, most of the townspeople had filtered into the celebration area, leaving the crew as a slowly collecting group sitting at the edge of the function looking in. A sort of awkward tension started to grow until Dig, Tonnet, and Gareth made their way to the front of them. Dig received many a questioning look, but only held up his paw in answer. Just then a loud voice came over the music.
Hello? Hello? Can everyone hear me?
On the other side of the crowd, at the roots of the large tree, the elder mayor had stepped up onto a table. Her voice was carried through speakers placed around the area. The crowds cheered for a second before quieting. The music didn't stop, but switched to a slow din played quietly.
All right, excellent. I don't want to cut into the festivities too much, but I wanted to say how happy I am to be celebrating another year with all of you. I am so proud of what we've done here, and though many don't consider tending to trees and dirt to be a particularly glorious thing, I beg to differ. Our parents and grandparents did the excruciating work of planting life on a lifeless planet, and we tend that life, that legacy. I say that that's the worthiest of pursuits. Now, before I tear into one of those pies, I've got one last thing. I'd like to officially invite the lovely crew of the Blue Nebula to join with us in this celebration.
She held her hand out towards the group, and everyone's attention turned.
If we've learned anything tending to nature, it's that life is a system, undeniably interconnected. Life from a different planet is just more life. So come, dance, eat, and have fun.
The town roared up to a great cheer. The smiles and cheers generally wouldn't have been received well, but after a few days of being inured to human behavior, it was a bit less scary. Still, as large as they were and in so many numbers, most of the crew only milled a few tentative steps forward. Deg noticed the hesitation. Thwill was hiding behind him. He was one of the few who stayed with the ship, but apparently decided to come out for their final night. He was repeatedly starting forward, only to think otherwise and reverse his movement.
Well, it's a celebration. Let's go.
Deg yelled before turning and striding into the fray. Tonnet and Gareth walked confidently behind him, and little by little everyone else followed suit, even Thwill. As the group of outsiders joined them, the townsfolk let out a great cheer. The music sprang back to a quick dancing tune, and the celebrations got properly underway. Tonnet was eager to sample the local foods. During their time inquiring with different people in the past few days, the conversations always leaned towards the celebration's amazing food. The humans promised a veritable cornucopia of Terran delights. Delightful, that is, in their research potential. Ton was quite interested to research Terran dietary requirements and how their cooking shaped around those requirements. Dig followed his science officer, less interested in the biology lesson and more interested in tasting this stuff. With his penchant for risky moves, it would be good to have Ton with him to make sure he didn't get too adventurous with unknown and potentially toxic materials. Gareth, on the other hand, split off from his two friends and wound his way through the towering crowds. He searched for the one human he knew amongst these energetic people. While they did their best to account for the diminutive size of their guests, Gareth was still knocked about a few times in his search. As such, he was a tad bit frustrated when finally he marked the one familiar face amidst the sea of large eyes and white teeth. It was the hair that caught his eye, Her hair was shorter than most and generally distinguished in color from the others around her. As he approached her, currently sitting on a bench facing outward with her back resting against the table, a hefty man stumbled into him, nearly knocking him to the ground. Fortunately, the man had the presence of mind to topple away from Gareth. He caught himself with a hand and took a second to get his feet back under himself.
Sorry there, little fella.
The man looked at a glass in his hand, presumably filled with the toxin humans were so fond of.
Perhaps I put this down for a bit and pick up a plate, yeah? Ha ha ha.
His belly shook with laughter as he moved off towards another table. He was met by a few peers who raised glasses and cheered. He responded in kind, apparently forgetting his own suggestion, and downed his beer. Gareth scoffed and even stewed a moment in his distaste. He turned and saw that Penn had watched the entire affair, one leg crossed over the other. She was currently looking at the man, but quickly met Gareth's gaze. Gareth walked over.
Don't read too much into it.
She spoke.
He meant no disrespect. If anything, the fact everyone is comfortable enough to get drunk is a good sign. Shows trust. Among humans, sharing a meal or a drink is one of the oldest signs of mutual respect.
I was under the impression it took more than a few minutes of consuming alcohol to succumb to the deleterious effects.
You would be right. I suspect he did a bit of what we call pre-gaming. He got a bit on a head start, a considerable one with his size.
Her head tilted slightly as she glanced over at the man.
I see. Are you partaking?
I am.
She raised her left hand and showed a frosty glass much like the man's.
Though I don't plan on ending out like him.
She set the glass down and motioned to the space beside her on the bench. Gareth hopped up and sat down next to her. His feet just barely brushed the ground.
And what about dancing?
He asked. They both looked out to the various crowds of people dancing, some in tandem with another. Others cut a ring around a few solo dancers. Whatever the style, though, the people seemed to utterly lose themselves in the music.
Oh, probably not. Certainly not without a few more of these in me.
She lifted the glass again. One man spun another out into a twirl before they both completed a 360 and came back together.
That seems counterintuitive to me. Your people's dancing is quite physically demanding. Why drink something that impairs your balance before doing something that requires it?
Courage.
You jump out the back of ships but find a bit of controlled movement scary?
It's not the movement, dude. Not that I'm much of a dancer at all, but look, I'm content to sit and enjoy the music, food, and drink.
The social aspect, then?
Something like that. Admiralty tried inviting me to functions. Suffice to say, they eventually stopped. I suppose I picked up a few of the more proper dances, but didn't get much else out of it other than scornful looks.
I see, Lamb. Well, if you don't mind the company, I'm sure I won't be doing any dancing either. Prefer not to be crushed.
Happy to have the conversation. We can people watch and judge them.
That sounds delightful.
Penn shifted her plate so that she could face Gareth and eat. Again, he took note of her less than ceremonious manner of eating, though he couldn't help but enjoy the more relaxed state she was in, less guarded. He much preferred this than how she was when they first met. From there, his thoughts turned to his own cold reception of her, which he winced at.
You want some?
She asked. Her plate was indeed piled high with enough food to feed Gareth perhaps 8 times over, not accounting for the likely vast differences in biological requirements.
Let's see.
He pulled up the data file Tonet had shared with the crew on Terran Foods. In a well-controlled environment, some of the foods were safe to eat, if not terribly nutritious, but the town had cooked a lot of this altogether. Given the possibility of cross-contamination, it was most likely not the best idea.
Well, I can drink the water. Probably.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. None of it comes across as too appetizing to me.
All right, now you've gone too far.
She gave a mocking gasp.
This brisket smells divine.
Because it contains many things your body needs. Not much at all for me. Quite the opposite, actually.
What do Wylands eat then?
I can survive on the containers of farmed single-celled organisms that populate the oceans of Wylia, but a proper meal would be a good algae and fruit salad. There is a restaurant back home that has the most amazing... Oh, how to describe it? you would probably compare it to a small gelatine cake. But they come from this organism that... What?
Pen had a terrible expression on her face.
Clearly, we have different definitions of appetizing.
They're really quite good, especially with these... Well, they're like little worms with legs that...
All right. That's enough of that I'm trying to eat.
Fine.
Gareth held up his hands, mimicking the human motion of ceding defeat. Pen noted what she knew to be a grin on his face. Assistant,